everyone. You can hear me well, right, with the audio? Perfect. My name is Alon. I'm one of the co-founders at SSV's core team. SSV is the first implementer for DVT, which is Distributed Validators Technology. Started out life actually in the Ethereum Foundation as a research project. The idea was, how do you take an Ethereum validator and being able to distribute it into shares, and those shares operated by independent operators, node operators. With the idea in mind that if you can do that on a large scale, you can actually decentralize a lot of the control for each and every validator. And that's kind of where censorship resistance, or at least what DVT can contribute to that, comes into play. I mean, the state of staking on Ethereum is pretty well known for everyone. It's pretty challenging. There's a lot of centralization happening, specifically because it's hard to run your own nodes. A lot of people don't have necessarily 32 ETH, and so what happened was a lot of that stake is being put into the hands of staking services and protocols, and those staking protocols became very large. And also the actual companies and entities running that infrastructure became very, very large. That causes a lot of issues. I mean, today you probably have around 5 or 6 entities, unique entities, that control about 2/3 of the stake on Ethereum. Many of them in the same regulatory geographical location, which is in of itself not doing great for censorship resistance. It creates a lot of challenges for Ethereum. It creates a lot of risk both for the users, obviously. Whoever is staking in a large staking service, it's a big target, so they might be more impacted by hacking or even accidentals. But also because the way slashing on Ethereum works, if a very large staking provider gets slashed, the impact or the penalty becomes greater than just a single solo staker getting slashed. And there's also systemic risk on Ethereum itself. Amongst other things, censorship, or the idea that you can decide, quote unquote, which transactions or which actions you can do on the blockchain just because of you controlling a mass amount of validators. There's a bunch of different reasons why censorship can happen. I want to focus on 3 of them. Obviously there's more. But there's always that malicious attack that creates censorship, and we'll kind of go through what that means. There's business decisions that cause censorship, and there's regulatory reasons that cause censorship. All 3 of them, and amongst other, obviously, reasons why censorship can occur, are dangerous, because ultimately we want an Ethereum that processes everything and is not swaying that way or the other. And so a malicious attack that can cause censorship obviously starts with some malicious actor taking control of an entity or a service provider that runs a lot of stake. So it can be through hacking, it can be through internal, work somebody did, or if it could be even an accident somebody did within the same entity or same company. The censorship there might not be, it could be both specific or very broad. Again, it's mostly to cause havoc, and it's for the most part temporary, hopefully temporary. And so that's kind of the malicious part of some malicious entity, third party, or even internal trying to do harm, and part of that harm can be censorship. Obviously, that regulatory censorship or regulation-based censorship is something I think that our industry in specific has a lot of challenges with. It can be forced or self-imposed. It can be, for the most part, it's very specific. So it's for very specific type of transaction. It's not broad, and it's evolving. It's something that starts out in one place, and in a year, 2 years, 3 years will be a whole different set of censorship, call them filters or conditions. And it's for the most part long-lasting. So it's not something temporary. It's something that when an entity being forced or decides to censor because of regulation, it's probably a decision that will follow through years. And the last one is really the business case. It has a lot in common with regulation, but it's mostly driven by, for the most part, for rewards or just dollars. And it's, for the most part, self-imposed. It's very specific. It's still evolving, and it's long-lasting. And so, for example, you can decide as an entity, I'm not including some transactions because I can't be bothered to spend gas on them, or just processing time, or whatever the reason is. But all three of them ultimately lead to the same non-desired kind of outcome, which is not all transactions are born equal. And that's a problem. And I think there's a bunch of different solutions I want to, or at least ways to mitigate that. I want to focus on two. So one is, it's something that I think for the most part we saw as a community being pushed around, or not pushed around, but being kind of promoted, which is just increase the number of unique entities or people that run validators and actually run validators that process and propose blocks and so on and so forth. I think it's a great thing to strive for. Personally, I think it's very limiting. It's not very scalable. Obviously, that's something we want to see, but I think we should be looking for more practical type of solutions. And the other one I want to talk about is DVT, distributed validators technology. That's something I've been working on for the past almost 3 years, and I think it has a lot in terms of value it can add or mitigate some of the censorship risks. And so what is really DVT? So DVT is the ability to take an Ethereum validator and split it up into shares, and those shares operated by completely independent operators, node operators. Those are kind of connected through one another in a group. We call them clusters. Clusters can vary in size, so it can be 4, 7, 10, or any other number of node operators within that cluster. And DVT really combines two pretty proven technologies. So one is threshold signatures. With BLS, it's super, super easy to do. And the other one is just consensus protocol, a thin consensus protocol which lets those operators, node operators, decide on what they want to sign, and then use threshold signatures to actually sign it. And the consensus protocol really gives us liveness and fault tolerance in general. Just being very, very robust against both offline nodes and malicious nodes and so on and so forth. And so that's really what DVT stands for and what it really does. And if you combine additional kind of layer to it through the key generation process, if you use DKG, for example, then you can even take it a step further and say, okay, nobody holds the actual key, and so there's less surface of attack, and it opens up some kind of new properties specifically around regulation in terms of responsibility and who really owns the key and the validator for that matter. And so DVT with DKG, I believe, can bring us to something very interesting. I tried to kind of put it into some graphical way of kind of showing it around, but this concept of censorship-resistant cluster is something I think is worth talking about. The idea that you can take a cluster, configure it in a way that really reduces the ability to censor through that cluster. And if you do it on a large enough scale, then you have you can have a big chunk of the validator set, really 99.9% censorship resistant. And so what is this censorship resistant cluster? And so the idea is that you can mix and match different types of operators, node operators, into something which gives a lot of protection. So in this case, what I did was I took 4 institutional, well-known institutional staking services, regulated, some of them in the US, currently hold a lot of stake, and their value is really that they're probably the most robust and scalable out there. They can handle the scale, they can handle being attacked, they've been around the business for a long time, right? That's the bottom line. And so you have 4 of them, and the cluster size is 7, and so the 3 additional ones are just solo stakers. They can be smaller institutions, they can be actual solo stakers, whatever the setup you want. The idea there is that you have 7 different unique entities. 4 of them could be potentially regulated and censor in their own way, but because they're attached to 3 others which are private and completely different type of an operator, those 3 only need just one more of those institutional stakers, institutional staking services, to sign something with them in order to broadcast it to the beacon chain. So imagine that, for example, there's coming up some new regulatory framework in the US saying certain types of transactions will be censored. Well, the solo stakers only need one more entity through the 4 others which are institutional to agree to sign with them a block. And that's something I think pretty plausible in the real world. Not all of the staking institutions are in the US, not all of them treat risk in the same way, and so on and so forth. And the flip side of that is that you still have the robustness of 4 institutional staking powerhouses. And so if one of those, or maybe even 2 of those solo stakers fail because they're not as robust, maybe they're even amateurs, the others can recuperate because, again, DVT holds within it a consensus protocol which gives you fault tolerance. And so I believe that this type of combination where you mix and match different types of staking node operators and staking services, you can really make a long stride forward in, at least on the surface and at least conceptually, make sure that it's not as easy as today to censor. Because today really, if again, we're going back to the first slide and talking about around 5 entities controlling the majority of the stake in Ethereum, and most of them in the US, it's pretty easy to censor. The only thing that the regulator needs to do is just send them a letter. I think none of them will say no to censor a specific transaction, although the implications are really big. But imagine that even Coinbase, like the most heavily regulated company out there, imagine them in one of those clusters, and imagine the validator key was created in a DKG. Coinbase can say outright that they don't control the validator, they are part of a committee, and they can simply abstain of signing that specific block where the specific transaction might be contagious for them specifically. But you will still have 6 other entities who can sign it. And the threshold is 4 out of 7. And so you have that bandwidth to say, okay, maybe this one I'm sitting out as Coinbase, but the others can still continue in signing it, and nothing happens on the surface. And so my personal belief is that this type of approach is very, very plausible. And it's definitely something that can be happening today. I mean, SSV has been around for a few years on testnets. We launched on mainnet. This is something that can happen even today on mainnet. No change to the Ethereum network at all. Signatures are completely transparent for the Bitcoin chain, for that matter. And so I believe this is a good approach to take a lot of the risk out without major engineering and changes to the network itself. Like a few words on SSV. SSV is a contract-based DVT network. So the idea is that you have a bunch of interconnected node operators, and they're all synced through a smart contract. That smart contract decides basically, or rather its users decide which validators run by which cluster. And again, cluster is just a set of operators that run a specific validator. And it's a global network. We're running on multiple data centers and continents and so on. And because it's a contract-based network, interacting with it super simple, just a simple web app, and you can start running your validator. I truly think that having the discussion to integrate more unique solo stakers or unique entities that run operators through something like DVT is a very simple way to take a lot of the risk out of censorship. And I think the risk for censorship is primarily due to those 3 factors: business, regulation, or a malicious activity. And I think DVT handles and can help in a lot of those cases. Thank you.